What I think we're trying to do here is give people the real life version. Like, what is it really like to not have a lottery ticket? How do you create the life that you want for yourself and for your family? And how do you have a realistic expectation of what that road looks like? And that road is going to be bumpy. It's going to be the best ride of your life, but it's going to be bumpy.
If you've ever felt the pain, the stress, the pressure of entrepreneurship, you know it extends beyond the business. On the last episode of this 3-part series, I shared how I was on the verge of bankruptcy, had to sell our home, watching my wife in tears, not ready to leave, but we struggled and we pushed through. This is part 2. I've invited 2 experts, Travis Revelle and Salah, my friends, to join me as co-hosts and talk through how we thrive through the pain. I'm Dr. Nate Salah. This is a call to leadership. There's never a point in business where it's smooth sailing. You know when it's smooth sailing? When you actually get on a boat and you're no longer working.
Correct.
And maybe then it's still not smooth, right? You're going to hit waves. But the point is, those are very difficult times. Those are very difficult, crucial conversations. And, you talk about your family, right? I mean, you go through these challenges together, right? I mean, she wept when we left that house. She's like, man, it's going to be better. This is the life of the entrepreneur.
Correct.
Yeah, it's...
And it's not just the individual, it's the family.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, you were trying. That's how I look at that. We doubled down on something. We thought we did all our,
You
all
can
our
only make
homework.
decisions based on the information you have at the time.
Who'd have known product deficiencies, the company was basically built to be sold. I mean, there's just a lot of things we weren't really, like, obviously now, hindsight.
Right.
It's like, I see it. Like now when I get a product, I could literally forecast how long of a run it's going to be. And I know it's going to be a limited run, right? Because that's the tech world. Yeah. If you're in the tech business, whoever's listening to this in the tech business, your shelf life on a product is a couple of years, maybe.
Medical business is the exact same way.
Yeah.
We call riding waves.
So when I hear that story, I say, man, that's someone that was really, that's going to make it. Because, when you kind of stick one foot in and not both, and you think you're going to get there, you want that security, but you don't want the risk, or you don't want to assume any risk or much risk and kind of want to be successful. Like, there's only one way to make it as an entrepreneur: go all in.
Balls out.
All in. If you're not ready to lose and lose big, you're not going to win or win big. And that is a decision to make. And that is a path where, some people go this way, the other people go the other way, but that's just reality, and there's times in your life where that proposition is scary and you shouldn't take it. I would tell you shouldn't take it. But I feel like being an entrepreneur is the best time is that, pre-family, start putting things into place, you have more time you can put in your business. You don't have responsibilities at home and have responsibilities with your children. Now it's different now as an entrepreneur, like where we're all at, because we're still entrepreneurs and we're still investing in our businesses and our time, but it's different now, right? But I'm talking about the ground level, building your business like we all did it. I mean, you actually had to probably reinvent yourself later than all 3 of us did. Right. You know what I mean? So how was that for you?
I mean, I look at it like this, right? If I'm talking to a business owner and I ask them, like, tell me about your biggest failure, and they don't have a failure, they haven't tried.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it was Warren Buffett that said, if you've gone through life never having failed, you're just not trying hard enough.
You're not trying hard enough, right? Like you have to fail. Like in life, you have to fail, and you have to learn the lesson that failure taught you, or you're going to repeat it and fail again. But failure isn't a bad thing, right? It's a learning opportunity, right? You understand, you learn about yourself, you learn about the people who you think are there for you, right? Like,
right.
Yeah, right. You learn a lot. Like you learn more in failure than you do in success.
100%.
And so the failure is part of the process. You're not going to be a successful entrepreneur if you haven't had failures, because you haven't been tested. You haven't been through it.
That's a good point. I mean, it's a testing.
It's a test.
At the end of the
Right?
day,
It is a testing.
It's a test. It's a test. To
Do you
see,
have the grit?
Do you have it?
if-
And
yeah.
it'll tell you, right? The hustle, whatever you want to call it, the hustle, it doesn't lie. You know what I mean? Like at the end of the day, you either have passed the test or you haven't, right? And so success is based on a whole lot of failures that get you to a point to where you see, right? You can see what's coming and you make those decisions beforehand. You become proactive instead of reactive. But if you don't know what it is to lose, how do you have a fear of loss? Right? If you've never lost, how do you know that gut-wrenching feeling of loss? Right?
Because you're not doing it. You're not trying hard
You're
enough.
not trying hard enough.
Yeah.
And the failures are what I use for motivation because I don't ever want to feel like that. Right? I don't ever want to look at my bank account and see I don't have enough money to cover the bills for my family. Right? I don't ever want to see that. I don't want to ever, be in a scenario where I am, destitute. Right? I've been there, done that, lived it, got myself out of
Check
it,
the
been
box.
back, right? been there a couple different times when I was younger. And so, that fear is the greatest motivator that I know.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I think that's great. But it's funny. I think it's different for everybody. I don't think, like, for me, fear is even in a calculation. Like, I feel like there's very little that I fear in the business entrepreneurship world. You know what I mean? Now there's opportunities I won't take because I feel like they're not great opportunities. But I think if you had a room of 100 people that were interested in entrepreneurship and you walked in, Travis Revelle, and you said, hey, part of being an entrepreneur is failing big. Who's here ready to risk everything and put everything you own on the line to be an entrepreneur? 65% of people would walk out the door.
I bet more than that.
Maybe more than that.
Yeah.
Because the perception has been conditioned to make you think it's something different. And honestly, I don't know anyone successful that hasn't lost. Like, I don't know anyone in my network that doesn't have a failure story, a reset button story. I don't know. I don't know anyone. Like, I'm trying to think as you're saying that. I'm like, who do I know that has never had to do this? And these are all successful people. I mean, Nate, Tesla was 90 days from bankruptcy. Elon Musk was 90 days from bankruptcy. I mean, let's name this. Who else?
Oh yeah.
I mean,
look at the 3 rockets. I mean, he was like,
Yeah.
okay, this has got to work. Otherwise we're sunk. And he put all his money from PayPal into, his other businesses. And, this is the entrepreneur mindset. And honestly, you have to choose. Now, granted, there are some who knock it out of the park the first try. And actually, I was talking to one of my colleagues when I was doing graduate work, and he told me, he said, hey, would you mind having a conversation with me about entrepreneurship? And he said, I've got it. My father-in-law went from corporate to entrepreneurship. He knocked it out of the park this first try. He said, I can't talk to him. He just won't get it. He won't get what you've been through because of all the businesses you've tried and failed at. He's like, I need that. That's what I need to hear, because it's not, and smart enough guy, he's like, it's not likely I'm going to knock it out of the park the first try.
It's a lottery ticket.
It's a lottery ticket. Oh man,
It's a lottery
I'd
ticket.
say, like, that's great.
I mean, it's great. That's great. And look, if that motivates somebody to go out there and try, awesome, right? Like, if that story gets somebody to go out there and try, awesome. What I think we're trying to do here is give people the real life version, right? Like, what is it really like to not have a lottery ticket? How do you create the life that you want for yourself and for your family? And how do you have a realistic expectation of what that road looks like? And that road is going to be bumpy. It's going to be the best ride of your life, but it's going to be bumpy. And I look back on times, right, where the 3 of us struggled together.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's like, I miss those days.
Yeah.
Because when you look back at it and it's 6 o'clock at night and you're running to Starbucks to get another coffee.
That's exciting.
It's exciting, right?
It's
like, it's a
exciting.
high.
I remember those
You know what I
days.
mean? Like,
Yeah.
it's a high. It's a great drug. But when you're in it, you can't see it. You know what I mean?
No.
And so it's like when I'm teaching my kids something or something's going on, and it's so funny, but I go back to Dory, right? Like, just keep swimming. You know what I mean? Like, it's the best advice I've ever heard.
Just
like,
keep swimming.
Just keep swimming. Like, if you're at a bump in the road and you're at a failure, like, don't quit. Like, you have to push through that, right? Because that's where the breakthrough happens. Sometimes you have to break down to break through. And I think that that's important for people to understand, especially somebody listening to us and they're at that struggle point right now, right? They're looking ahead and there's not a clear path, right? They have this vision, they have this dream, they want to be something. Don't let a failure stop you, right? Learn from it, adapt, overcome. And we've said this for years, adapt and overcome. Like, figure out what it is that's stopping you, go through it, around it, over it, whatever it is. But just know that part of being an entrepreneur is struggling, is not having, right?
And don't go it alone.
No.
I mean, just reminding me as you're sharing that, when back to this clear issue, right? Back in 2011, we came into your office because you were running those divisions at Clearwire, and I brought my sword in. I don't know if you remember that. I brought my sword in.
Yeah, I remember.
And you're like, okay.
By the way, I tried to talk him out of that. I was like, I don't know about that, man.
Why are you bringing?
But he had a sword in his hand, so I wasn't going to argue.
Like, why is this Palestinian descendant? Anyway, but I brought the sword in as an illustration, certainly not as a way to show anyone that I was going to slice anyone up. But I said, you may not remember, but I was like, hey, man, I'm going to have to fall on my sword unless we can figure a way out of this mess together. And, you went up the chain, made some things happen. We hustled to get out of this crazy mess we were in because we were in deep. I mean, basically every penny I had
access to, and
every penny of credit I had, I went all in with this. And of course I still have my tax business, but that's a scary place to be.
If you're the guy listening to this and saying, what the hell's wrong with these guys? Like, that's like, what is wrong with you guys? Like, how can you put yourself, like, you're that guy who shouldn't own a business if you're saying that to yourself. Like, because the guys who have, what did we say, Travis? You're trying, right? Something that I kind of think perception of marriage is the same way. A lot like owning a business.
Mm-hmm.
All the time, romantic, perfect, no disputes, like no work you have to put in for it. It's just this, it takes work, right? So I think, what, 50% of marriages fail? Is that the number?
I think it's probably more than that.
Okay.
I really want to see what that would be like coming out of the pandemic, right? Like,
it's again, gratification is an important. Human beings want to have instant gratification, and it's going to be beautiful and great, and we want it, and we want the good part, but the bad part, you can just leave that out. You know what I mean? Nothing in life worthwhile is like that, right? Marriage, beautiful thing, right? Parenting, beautiful thing, but they're hard. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, it's hard. It's work. Having your own company, right? Beautiful thing, but it's work. And so people need to understand, right? Like, you're going to work harder, but the reward is bigger. And so it's, what do you want to do, right? Do you want to work really hard and scratch and claw, but you get a lifestyle, hopefully, right, that you appreciate and it brings you comfort eventually one day? Or do you want to go clock into a job and work hard for somebody else, but have the comfort of having that check every 2 weeks or whatever it is, right?
As long as they keep you employed.
As long as they keep you employed. But at any time, you walk in and be like, cutting back. Eventually, as an employer, I say this, not to interrupt you, but that's a good point, is you get to a point where you're buying time as an employer. So you get to a point as an entrepreneur, let's say you reach a level of success, you have time. You get to that point eventually, 25, 30 years later, whatever the number is, you're buying time. Mm-hmm. You've bought time. That's at the point where you're buying time. As an employee, you're selling time. You're selling your time, right? Yep. So... Yep. I think that's an interesting, time, yeah. But you don't get it right away. So it's like, you want to get to the point where you can buy time, but that's not something you get right away.
And the fundamental, I think, as you mentioned, Travis, earlier, is freedom. You get the freedom to choose, ultimately, how you dial this in. I mean, some people think that entrepreneurship is freedom initially. I mean, there's freedom to choose, but also you're trading a 9 to 5 for a 5 to 9. And I'm talking 5 in the morning to 9 at night, if not later. I mean, look, to this day, I have not taken a vacation to where I've been able to quote unquote clock out on that trip as a business owner. I mean, and that's okay. I mean, that's simply the relationship you have with your business, because your business is your baby, but you also have your family. And so a good transition, people talk about a work-life balance. You've heard this terminology for years, right? And over the years, I think I've just completely begun to reject the word balance. I mean, there's certain things you can balance, maybe on one leg, but to say that I have equality, right? Because really balance is equality in every area of my life I don't think the terminology even works. I like the word harmony, maybe creating a masterpiece, but there's times in certain seasons when I'm punching it out working, and there's other seasons when I'm spending time with my family and whatnot. But I can't really say that it's a balance.
It's never a balance. I mean, I think, the thing that you have is you almost have two masters, right? When you're an entrepreneur, you have your family and you've got your business, and you're never going to be equal in both, right? And so what I personally try to do is I don't focus on the quantity of time I have with my family. I focus on the quality of time that I have with my family, right? And so that time that I spent with my family has changed over the years. I have 5-year-old twins. When they were younger, I would make sure that I had a hard pause in my day from 4 to 6, because that's when there was stuff that needed to be done at home. And so, I would get things done before 4, and I would let people know I'm available after 6. But from 4 to 6, I have to be present to do my job as a father and help out my wife with my children. Now that time has changed over the years as they get older and they're more self-sufficient, but there is never a snapshot in time where I can say I spent 50% of my time working and 50% of my time with my family, right? It doesn't work like that. But being an entrepreneur, I can choose to have quality time with my family. So I can structure my day in a way in which I need to take my kids to school in the morning, right? I need to, pick them up at a certain time, or I need to do something outside with them. There is quality time that I can do to do that. But there is no such thing as a work-life balance where you're spending 50% of your time at work and 50% of your time with your family.
That's, I shook my head when you said that, because it's just like, that's so like this is not reality in a way. That's the whole conditioning and perception of what it is. I would think, and a lot in my case, it's kind of the same thing, quality, quantity, not so much, 2 working parents, but, you can achieve that. But I think that's a pressure that not necessarily 50-50 balance you can achieve. I don't believe you can do that and be successful at anything. But I think that is an interesting philosophy, right? I may not have the quantity of time with you, but that quality of time I have with you is going to be a 10 out of 10. That's awesome. It's awesome.
Yeah. I mean, look, how difficult is it to be fully present in the moment, right? I mean, and that takes discipline to do that. It takes discernment. It also takes having the care to give yourself margin in your day. It's very difficult for us to do that, even to this day. It's a grind, that margin piece. But I really appreciate having the schedule mindset where I can say, okay, you know what, this is your time. And for example, I teach university, and it's just part-time adjunct, and it takes time away from my family. So I created another leverage point for my family. Every hour that I'm teaching university is an hour that I'm going to be spending time with them on vacation. And every dollar that I earn from university teaching, we put that aside for super cool vacation stuff.
That's awesome.
So what that does is it creates a connection. So we're all in this together. They actually see that I'm doing something I'm passionate about, but then I'm reinvesting that passion back into them. So this is, I think, what you're talking about, right? It's like, okay, now when I teach, they're like, okay, there's a benefit for us too. We're all winning.
Yeah, I think that's what it, I mean, there's obviously different levels to that, but what if you don't have a business that's profitable and you're trying to make it successful or profitable? And you can't take vacations, but you're going to have to put all the time in. That creates this turbulence at home, right? Because that's,
Yeah, and there's been years when I'm sure all of us have not taken a vacation, right?
Right. And I think right, a lot of that comes from, communicating clearly.
Yes.
Right. I think that's what's key. For my wife and I, right, we started our company together. People are like, you're crazy. You're starting a company with your wife. Like, how do you make that work?
Well, your wife's amazing, so it's fine.
Correct. I mean, she is. She's definitely the better of the two. But I mean, I think it's communication, right? And so like with my children, right? It's they understand. Look, daddy may be home in the office, but he's working, right? Like there are barriers that you need to set up. You need, the best thing I can tell an entrepreneur is to schedule your day, your week, your month, right? Like you have to be working, and even if it's cold calling, right? Like whatever it is, like whatever it is you do, like you have freedom to choose. And that freedom is a very double-edged sword, right? Because you can choose to completely slack off and go to the gym or go to the beach or sleep in. You're not gonna make any money, right? You're gonna wind up, failing. So I think that being an entrepreneur is a lifestyle, not only for yourself, but it's for your family as well. And you've got to communicate clearly. Right. These are the whys, right? This is why mom and dad have to go, on a work trip. You know what I mean? Or there are times just 2 weeks ago, my wife was in Orlando and I was in Milwaukee, right? And my kids are like, what are you doing? And mommy's got a meeting, daddy's got a meeting, and that's part of the gig, and so communicating with your family, communicating with your friends, putting up solid boundaries so that you're able to do your job and not letting people. I remember when I started, people were like, my friends would be like, well, it's not like you got to get up and go to work tomorrow. You're your own boss, like you can be late. And I'm like, no, like that's not how it works, So I think, right, people get into entrepreneurship, like we just said, they want to make a lot of money. They want all this freedom. But there's sacrifices that have to be made, and you've got to be able to structure yourself in a way that you hold yourself accountable to doing what needs to be done to be successful.
And it's also about vision casting too. I mean, you talk about communication. I think that's clearly where if we start to break down our relationships with our family, it's I think generally it starts with communication. But setting that right expectation, I think, is important for them. And like the vision casting piece, like you said, the why. For example, as you were speaking, it reminded me, I don't know how many years ago I started doing this, but probably about 5 or so. And of course, in accounting and advisory, it's busiest, January, February, March, April, right? And my wife used to say, kind of joking, kind of not, you're going away for tax season, right? It's a hard time for her as a spouse, right? Taking care of the house, taking care of the family. And I started reframing the vision casting and how I communicated what this was. And I started reframing it from the mindset of harvesting, like as we're farmers. And so I've never heard of a farmer that came back from harvesting and complained about a good crop. Never. So I would start going home at night and I say, it was a good harvest today. God willing, we're gonna have a good crop. And it started changing their vision of what I was going out and doing. Instead of saying, oh, he's never home during this time, he's always working, right? Instead of complaining, they began to support. It all revolved around communicating. It's so essential in what we do. And however, I think it's also important to have conversations, at least right now, around the struggle, the juggle in a family. I mean, it doesn't always work out smoothly. Sometimes there's real issues at home. And I think we need to talk about that. I think entrepreneurs need to hear where sometimes we have fractures.
Yeah. I mean, listen, I think Sam nailed it, right? I mean, in a marriage, you've got to work at it, right? At work, You know, you're a business, you've got to work at it. Those two things, sometimes they're not mutually beneficial. You know, I mean, sometimes you're in a season in life where you have to work really hard and long. And I think that if you haven't laid out, if you don't bring your partner along with you and explain the highs and the lows with them, they're not going to be an asset to you. You know what I mean? Unfortunately, they're not. And I don't think that, I don't want to say you can't, but it's hard to be an entrepreneur and not have a support system of people who support you in what you're doing and believe in you and understand. Like, there are times when you're not going to be able to be here, you know? And there are times where my wife isn't able to be at home because she has her thing that she's doing in her own business, and I've got to pick up the slack. And so I think that, you know,
and stress levels go up.
Stress levels are,
I mean, they go through the roof
high.
sometimes.
Absolutely.
It's like you're on the brink of like having a major blow, and you got to like just get like, oh, it's a tough time. And sometimes maybe you don't, and you do have that blowout.
Absolutely. And you know, and I think that that's just the reality of the situation. You know, there isn't a clear cut, like there's not a piece of advice I could give to an entrepreneur and say, other than communicate everything, over communicate to your support system so they understand when to help, when to take a step back, right? If your partner in life isn't as strong as your partner in business, you're not going to be successful, right? You're only as good as your weakest link, you know? And if that communication isn't strong, or your wife doesn't understand that, or your partner doesn't understand that, you're not going to be successful. And so, you know, entrepreneurship is, and as we continue to talk about it, it is a lifestyle for an entire family unit. You know, everybody rides that wave, good and bad. And I think there are important tools that you can use from communicating effectively. But just letting the people around you understand what you need and when you need it is I think super important to your mental stability.
Yeah. I think that, you know, that significant other needs to be a good partner, right? So I think that if they don't see your vision, like you said, communicated effectively, and they don't buy into it, right? Then you have problems, strife, arguments, you know, because you go in and say, hey, I'm going to open this business. We're not going to make money for two to 3 years. We're going to live off nickels and dimes. Our lifestyle is going to change. Are you ready to jump on this with me? Right? Or you've set the wrong expectation of what it is because you think it's going to be that way and it's not. So I think that there's, you know, both have responsibility, right? I think as a partner or wife or, you know, whatever it may be, I think, you know, you have a responsibility to support your husband or wife, right? In my opinion. Okay. I've been lucky enough to have a wife that's been very supportive of me and what I'm doing. I've had less of the hurdles that maybe I hear about, but I mean, that support piece is integral in my ability to focus and execute, right? So in turn, the fruits of my labor are, you know, able to be, you know, seen and obviously vacations and things like that.
She trusts you.
Again, and that's the trust factor.
Does she trust that there will always be enough money to pay the bills? Does she trust that if there isn't, you'll find a way? Does she trust that?
I think her exact words, I think this was said before. I think she said, I trust him in what he does, and I don't need to understand every piece of his business for me to feel comfortable. So I know that that's probably unique. I'm not saying I don't know what the percentage of wives that would say that, but it's been an asset.
If it's
or a husband, that's what I mean. Yeah. It's been an asset because when I was working 12-hour days with you, Travis, and closing down Galleria Mall at 9:30 and 9:45 at night, and being in tax season or Christmas, spending literally 60 days in a mall or a retail setting, and I had someone in my ear all day long talking about come home for dinner, or we're going to have this problem when I get home, I don't know if I would have been successful or where I'm at today, because then I would have pulled me away from what I needed to do, the development of myself, development of my businesses. So I've been very fortunate from that aspect. And, but I also understand that when a wife or husband does this, it affects the whole family. And that's why I go back to saying, not that you can't be an entrepreneur. No, I'm not saying you can't be an entrepreneur when you have a family or I'm not saying that's the case, but obviously it's more of a difficult calculation of time and resource and risk than it is when I started being an entrepreneur at 20 years old, which was reckless and just wanted to make money and just didn't understand things completely. It just knew how to do things, but there's a lot I didn't know, right? So, and I learned through failure and missteps and processes and things like that, mentorship. But that's an integral piece. I honestly don't 100%, understand how you can, from a spouse perspective, make stuff difficult on your other spouse, because he's trying to make a better life for you and your family, and it may not be pretty right now.
Well, I think part of it is that we don't always have the answers, but as leaders, we have to have assurance that it's going to be okay. And that doesn't mean that we won't face tremendous trials along the journey. But I think that's also part of painting that picture. This journey is going to be an adventure. There's going to be times where we're going to be like, oh my goodness, what's happened? There's going to be times when we pull through and we avert trials and tragedies. But it's all part of the story. I mean, it's literally all part of the story. And we have to figure out what kind of story we want to sign up for.